I was really tight in my bed because it was the Christmas season and everyone in my entire family was out except me, and my little brother. They didn't want me to go because they were buying my Christmas gifts. I was very tired and I didn't feel like going out on that day, but I had ordered my brother a surprise Christmas gift. Now it is not as hard as it decided what he wants for any holiday. That includes presents, so I decided to go online on my laptop and was about to buy him a Wubbzy VCR, but the price was $50, and that was a quite unbelievable price for a cheap VCR shipping for some unknown location according to the website where I bought it. And I found insanity frustrated because the description mentioned I had to rot in hell because there's no hope for you. This made me curious and wanted me to buy it to see what it was all about. But then the website completely closed out and my computer went off. But then it was unexpectedly came back on and it said that it had a virus on a little notification, which seemed odd for my computer to be doing that. Then it reopened on my web browser, and it said that my purchase was complete, even through I didn't even pay for anything, and my purchase wasn't even complete at all. But then I saw online on my account that the price had changed to free, and I did not need to pay at all for the VCR, but it was kind of strange for that online store did that. Later, and I mean literally, the package arrived in the mail the next day and I decided to hide it because it was my little brother's Christmas gift. And everyone was back then. Well, we were all living together anyway, so of course we were back. They were all surprised to see me for some reason, and they smelled like cocaine, and their eyes were all black holes, and they all said to me, "Black blood and creamy gush," 3 times before going out and screaming a distorted scream that they had never screamed like before. But then once I took the VCR tape and picked it up, and it had blood all over it. It was so disturbing then that I was throwing up blood for some reason, and then I heard a squeaking sound coming from my bedroom. I looked in the hallway to find nothing there, but before I was my little brother storming out of his room crying and wailing. I asked him what was wrong, but he was so upset that he couldn't even say anything. Eventually, it was Christmas morning, and my little brother was excited to see his Christmas present and wanted to open it up. But when he fell down the stairs and landed on his butt, then he progressed to come back down and open his Christmas presents in extreme excitement. But he was surprised to found the whole family gone except me. My parents, who even said themselves that they were going out for Christmas dinner due to the turkey being completely burnt and even covered in blood for some reason. They said that they were going to go outside for a friendly Christmas walk, but it looked obvious that they were lying because their worried expressions on their face as they were leaving. They left me and my little brother alone to open presents, and eventually after loads and loads of wrapping paper all over the place, he opened his VCR tape as his final Christmas gift. Then he opened it up after all the random gift bought by our relatives who never even lived close to us. He put the VCR into the player, and of course I watched it because I enjoyed Wubbzy myself. I went to make myself some buttered popcorn and watch it with him, but then once I opened up the case of the VCR, it seemed like to have grease stains completely all over the VCR case, including the tape itself. But then once I put the VCR straight into the player, the power instantly went out and I heard a groaning noise coming from my little brother's bedroom. I looked over by my side to find him gone and him storm out of his room yet again, screaming and crying. But this time he had black holes coming from his eyes, and they were bleeding, of course, and his mouth was literally ripped off of his face. Then he got sucked in by some force and back into his room, then stormed into his room to find him completely disappeared and his mother peeking from out of the back window of our house crying and wanted to get back in. So I let my parents and the rest of my family back in and they called the police. Then the power saintly came back on the groaning stopped. And I progressed with watching the Wubbzy VCR. Once it was in the player, there were no logos or intros or anything. It just instantly cut to the episode. Usually, VCRs have those same kind of things that you would see on any VHS tape, like on a SpongeBob, Invader Zim, or any show in general. Like it would have the Nickelodeon logo or just any logo that show is technically from. It would have the FBI warning, trailers, and commercials before the presentation, but this one didn't, apparently. First, it displayed a completely black screen with a human mouth completely covered in blood, and a text in Ukrainian that translated to "Rest in peace, best friends." Then it cuts to a distorted audio and a black and white video of Wubbzy playing kickball in his backyard while laughing, throwing up blood, and his eyes becoming extremely bloodshot as he is playing. At first I thought I was seeing things, but his bloodshot eyes and the blood that we were filling up was extremely hyper-realistic. Something outrageous and gory like this had never been seen in a show before, and I insanely became so disgusted that I literally threw up on the floor in the same way as Wubbzy. I threw up so hard, even some of my puke was over the screen, and in my butter popcorn. My popcorn looked bloody now because I was throwing up blood. Then, all of a sudden, he stopped for a moment. There was no sound at this point. He looks at me. The video becomes darker. The static becomes worse. There were corpses lying on the grass around him. As the video is getting darker, then I hear a distorted groaning noise. The groaning noise gets louder and louder, and then I hear a blood-curdling scream at full volume as it displays transparent scenes of Bridget ripping her internal intestines and her eyeballs out and then eating them. Then the then after that transparent scene ended, it cuts back to Wubbzy crying. His eyes are now just black holes, and his mouth is completely stretched. His jaw is broken, and his oral cavity was completely bloody. Then his crying became louder and more heard. His black holes became bigger, and his crying turns into the same screaming sound that my little brother was screaming in. Plus, the sound became even more distorted than before. His crying goes on and on for about a minute or two, and then eventually starts crying blood to cry blood. Then more and more blood comes out, and we can clearly see that his mouth exploded and all of his teeth are gone. He then sits on a rock in the next scene, puts a green cloak over his head, and has no other physical features besides his eyes. And he starts banging his head on it so hard that it gives him a concussion. Then he continues to bang his head until his head bleeds, and his brain is visible through his forehead. Then he takes out a pistol and points it at this camera, and then pulls the trigger, and pulls the trigger before fading to black. There were blood all over the screen. The blood is so realistic that it looked like someone poured a bucket of blood on the screen. It cuts to clips of Bridget hanging on a noose in her workshop. Her workshop had been wrecked. There were corpses of Huggy, Buggy, and Earl, with their heads exploded and all of their brains splattered in the machinery of the room. There was also blood everywhere, which was also the same filter that this scene was in, which it had black holes for eyes, the same as Wubbzy, and then she starts bleeding from her eyes. The room gets darker, then she comes back to life. Marksily escapes from the noose and runs to Walden's house, literally at the speed of light before fading into a black screen as the grain gets worse. The static gets louder and low pitch. Then it cuts back, and then immediately cuts to Widget reaching Walden's house. He is crying. His library is completely wrecked in the same way as Widget's. His dinosaur bones statues were all falling and broken in a realistic way. His books were ripped and have intestines. They also had hearts, paper cut straight into the pages, and all of his history books had corpses of the mailman and the coolie kid paper cut straight into them. The coolie kid's eyes were paper cuts, including the mailman, and all of the intestines were ripped out. Then it panned out to found that Walden hanged himself with a noose, and Widget is out of the scene. Walden's intestines are all over the place. His eyes were half open, and there was somewhat too nice in both of his shoulders. Then Walden came back to life and continues to cry while on the noose. And this time, his crying blood before fading to black with an extremely low static and the sound of a group of people being killed. These sound effects sound like my family being killed, which really started to make me worried. Then it fades to a blood-curdling scream while we see transparent clips of Bridget being hacked away with an axe backwards in a hyper-realistic way. It is unknown who is hacking her, but I can clearly see the shadows of ponytails and a bow. I don't really know who it is, but you look exactly like Daisy. It eventually fades into a distorted screaming noise with static. Then it stops, and then it cuts to Wubbzy's house, completely deserted, and everything is bloody. The video is extremely grimy, and all of the audio is in reverse and distorted. Then all of a suddenly, Tiny the Fleagle comes on the screen and screams. And the same distorted scream from before. His eyes were yet again black holes, and his mouth was completely black, and he was throwing up blood as he was screaming. Then 20 seconds of disturbing screams. He insanely gets pulled by someone off screen with a grimy groaning, and a laughing voice is played. It cuts to a small figure wearing a black hoodie on with black holes and a bloody knife, was completely covered in blood, and it had pink ponytails. Then it insanely cuts to black before the next scene of the most saddest thing I've seen. It was the corpse of Tiny the Fleagle, wearing the same black hood that the figure was wearing, but completely covered in blood, with his intestines, his heart, and his brain completely smashed up with a bloody axe inside Tiny's body. He was even paper cut with some pages of paper from Walden's house, and his brain matters splattered all over the place. Then Daisy is seen murdering Tiny the Fleagle in reverse. She takes a bloody axe and starts hacking away at Tiny the Fleagle's body in reverse. Then Tiny came back to life, jumps on Daisy, starts biting Daisy's neck, and says, "Yum yum!" Then it cuts to Wuzzleberg, completely wrecked. Everyone, corpses, was all scattered all over the place. There was even an animated map there of corpse of Bob Boyle, the creator of Wubbzy. Then Daisy jumps up with a bloody black hoodie that had flowers all over it. It scared the viewer with blood all over her face, with a knife and a scream, and is in a distorted scream. Then Daisy stays on the screen for about a minute, and Wuzzleberg had more corpses scattered all over the place. Daisy's screaming became louder and louder. Then Daisy screams, "What in hell?" before she runs off into Wuzzleberg, laughing and giggling and sings her la 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 song, while a trail of blood and organs is following her as she runs off into Wuzzleberg. The final scenes of this horrifying, dramatic episode shows the corpses of all the Wubbzy characters and all the guest stars, including the Wub Girls, all completely chopped up with bloody axes, all of their body parts covered in facials and blood and bloody knives in their backs. Then it cuts to black with an extremely loud static. The static gets louder and louder before it cuts to Wubbzy hanging on a noose with blood all over him and a knife in his neck, and his eyes are on the floor, and his mouth is covered in blood too. Then a few seconds, Daisy scares the viewer again while she is holding the same bloody knife like from before, but this time she is also carrying an axe in the other hand. It cuts to a black screen for a minute, and the episode ends with Daisy standing in the dark with with her black hoodie on, and she looks directly at the viewer with a disturbing face, and she screams as a broken audio is playing in the background, and then she kills herself by sticking a knife straight into her neck as the corpse of the whole whole cast of Wubbzy are lying around. Then it cuts to a black screen before cutting to a scene of a man leaving in a room in the dark with a bloody knife, and then actually killing himself on camera by sticking the knife straight into his neck. Then he comes back to life and goes into the dark. There's no sound at this point, just completely silence. But then all of a sudden, a dark figure comes near the room and disappears. After a long time of waiting, the man who killed himself in the scene scares the viewer with a noose around his neck, and his mouth is stretched. After I saw the VCR, I was completely shocked. I took the VCR and put it into my laptop, and I took some screenshots to report the police. I will report it once arrive. I will report it once they arrive from my missing brother, and then I will smash the VCR into bits with a sledgehammer. But once I smash it, I was literally smashing the VCR in reverse for some reason. I saw that my eyes were black holes, as well as the reflection of our car while I was smashing the VCR outside. I heard Wubbzy's crying from inside the house. Then I went back inside hyperating and crying so hard that I was literally crying blood. The VCR somehow was leaked into the internet, and only if I could go back in time to stop me from watching that horrifying video and not buying it, that would sure make a difference in my life today. My mind is completely stuck on the VCR and those disturbing images of Wubbzy Wuzzleberg, and that whole Wubbzy episode will never leave my head at all, no matter what I think of. I went to the doctors very shortly after watching the episode, and the doctor said that I have serious illness called CREEPYPASTA, and he said that I will be put to sleep within a week. I think that death was better off for me anyways. It turns out that my whole entire family was kidnapped and murdered by Daisy anyways. However, it turned out my mom and dad were originally going to kill Daisy but escaped and had both committed suicide, including my brother. There was no other choice I have to leave the world in order to escape this horrifying life.